It's interesting. I went to read Patinkin and the literature. That point was sort of acknowledged, but never discussed in a serious way. And as you know, in the textbooks, has been largely ignored. But that, I think, is a serious criticism that Bernanke, in studying the Great Depression, has brought up, and that we who have studied the emerging markets crisis has also brought up. I think it's a very key observation of why the classical solution may not work, even though prices are perfectly flexible. That's the beauty. What you have there is a situation where the financial sector is too rigid. There's a lot of, Macro has been going around talking a lot about the labor market. And what you hear all the time is that part of the problem is that the labor market is inflexible. Very few people will say, well, before thinking about that, the flexibility is in the financial market itself. We have incomplete markets, very simple-minded contracts. And that's what makes this so complicated. It's not the labor market. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that wages go through the floor when this happens, and especially in countries, in emerging countries, emerging market countries and developing countries when you have a large informal sector. So it's very hard to argue that wages are inflexible. But on the other hand, the more primitive is the country, the more underdeveloped is the country from an economic point of view, the more likely it is that you will run into inefficient problems. I'm being told that I'm running out of time, so I don't want to go into this. The Friedmanian solution is put money into the system. The problem was that at one point, this solution is that at one point, open market operations, when interest rates go to zero, is like exchanging one $20 bill for two $10 bills. So that makes no difference. That's why we went into what's called quantitative easing, and it seemed to be working. Okay, I have 5 minutes, so I have to be very prudent in the use of my time. Let me try to say something about emerging markets. On emerging markets, there is a problem. Emerging markets are innocent bystanders. They have been innocent bystanders in most of these crises, in the sense that they're being hit by this even though they were not the cause, they were not at the epicenter. And besides, the experience shows that when there is a flight to safety, funds go into treasury bills, U.S. treasury bills, and not emerging market treasury bills. That's changing a little bit now, but that's the general rule. Therefore, when you have a crisis like this, it goes together with large currency devaluation, because money wants out, and sizable loss of international reserves. Currency devaluation in emerging markets doesn't help very much. Especially under present circumstances, because everybody devalued. When you look around the world after Lehman, devaluation in emerging markets was about 30%. So everybody devaluing 30%, you don't improve your standing. Obviously, if you don't devalue, you are worse off. But devaluation did not, by itself, it's hard to argue that it had a big effect. On the other hand, it may be counterproductive because many emerging markets have foreign exchange denominated debt. So a devaluation may make the situation, from a financial point of view, worse. So let me go quickly over this. That's why I tend to be somewhat skeptical about the power of monetary policy in emerging markets. I mean, the power, like you see it in the US, really being able to try to reactivate or at least not stop the credit channel. It's more difficult because in this, the money is flowing out. It's not an increase in the demand of domestic money, like in the United States, or domestic assets, like in the United States. It's a flight away from domestic money. So the situation is very different. Fiscal policy, I'm a little bit more optimistic about that, but especially when it is used for international reserves for providing credit to the export sector, that we saw in Brazil, for example, or an increase in the demand for non-tradables, expanding social programs, and partly to prevent a sudden collapse of, for example, the real estate prices, or at least cushion that. So there may be a role for that. And of course, I mean, the big drawback of all of this is that fiscal policy depends on the ability of increasing increasing public debt, and that in the future may be costly. But so let me just end with a few words on on the new financial architecture. So if you think that the bank run is, thank you. If we think that the bank run approach is relevant, then that's a strong argument for trying to establish some sort of lender of last resort at the global level. Now, politically, that's very tricky. Some people think it is a non-starter. I hope we can start it before we have a very, very big crisis. But we are moving in that direction. The IMF is now creating new facilities that look a little bit like going into the direction of becoming a lender of last resort. So I think that is unavoidable. The alternative would be to have a system where the financial system does not intermediate anything, you don't have credit, therefore there is no possibility of a mismatch. Otherwise, I mean, regulation sounds very good, but it's very difficult. And the private sector, or financial sector, is always trying to find ways to get around regulation. There's lots of people out there, very smart people playing against you, the government, and historically we've seen that they can bypass the regulator in many ways. So it's likely that we are going to have another one like this in the future. So let's be better prepared with at least stronger instruments. And if not the instruments, I think, again, a very big role that research can do about it is to be able to reach some consensus that this is good, so that the policymakers, when they have to make these decisions, I mean, coordinating central banks was not easy. Quantitative easing was not easy because you were buying garbage from the market for cash. And so the policymakers are under very heavy pressure from politicians and the opposition. There's a whole discussion out there which does not have a rationality basis, it has a different motivation. So if we have our ideas clear enough and we can express them, I think that could make a difference. Of course, the lender of last resort should be having in mind that if it is being called to action, it has to be able to know how to act in such a way as to reactivate the credit channel. And that's not an easy trick.